We're trying to play the Picochess CT800 engine on an ELO level of 1210. This is a Picochess version that Dirk just made available. Calls it 3.1. Has a new graphics display for the board. I kind of like it. We'll see what we do here.
Pawn from d2 to d4. Pawn from d7 to d5.
Let's do that.
Pawn from c2 to c4. Pawn from c7 to c6. Pawn from e2 to e3. Knight from g8 to f6. Knight from g1 to f3. Bishop from c8 to g4. Pawn from h2 to h3. Bishop from g4 to f3. Bishop takes knight. Queen from d1 to f3. Queen takes bishop. Queen from d8 to c7. Queen from f3 to f4. Queen from c7 to f4. Queen takes queen.
Seizes a good trade. So there we go.
Pawn from e3 to f4.
Okay.
Pawn takes queen.
Okay. So.
Pawn from a7 to a5.
There we go. Now.
Knight from b1 to c3.
Well, he's better off than I am because I've got double pawns. It shows me at a very slight advantage. Doesn't mean anything.
Pawn from e7 to e6.
Okay.
Bishop from f1 to e2.
Here we go.
Pawn from c6 to c5.
Well, that's not good. Let's take that.
Pawn from c4 to d5. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn from c5 to d4. Pawn takes pawn.
Probably don't need to be out there.
Knight from c3 to b5. Bishop from f8 to b4. Check.
Yeah, let's read that.
Bishop from c1 to d2. Bishop from b4 to d2. Check.
Yeah. And I don't have a whole lot of options here.
King from e1 to d2. King takes bishop. Knight from f6 to d5. Knight takes pawn. Rook from a1 to c1. Pawn from g7 to g5.
Oh, this should be in my favor.
Rook from c1 to c8. King from e8 to d7.
Oh, that's a significant advantage.
Rook from c8 to h8. Rook takes rook. Knight from d5 to f4. Knight takes pawn. Knight from b5 to d4. Knight takes pawn. Knight from f4 to g2. Knight takes pawn. Rook from h1 to g1. Knight from g2 to f4. Rook from h8 to h7. Rook takes pawn. King from d7 to e7. Rook from g1 to g5. Rook takes pawn. Knight from b8 to c6.
Oh, we're just going to take it.
Knight from d4 to c6. Knight takes knight. Pawn from b7 to c6. Pawn takes knight.
I could be looking worse here.
Pawn from h3 to h4. Rook from 8 to b8. Pawn from b2 to b3. Rook from b8 to d8. Check. King from d2 to e3.
I don't know about
Knight
that
from
last
f4
move.
to d5. Check.
See, I don't know about that move.
King from e3 to f3. Knight from d5 to f6. Rook from h7 to h6. Knight from f6 to d5.
And for about 2 cents, I'd take him out.
Rook from g5 to e5. Rook from d8 to d6. Bishop from e2 to c4. Knight from d5 to c3. Pawn from h4 to h5. Knight from c3 to a2. Knight takes pawn. Rook from h6 to h7. Knight from a2 to c1. Pawn from h5 to h6. Pawn from c6 to c5. Rook from h7 to h8. Rook from d6 to b6. Rook from h8 to a8. King from e7 to f6. King from f3 to f4. King from f6 to g6. Rook from a to e2. Knight from c1 to b3. Knight takes pawn.
Yeah, well, I got you there.
Bishop from c4 to b3. Bishop takes knight. Rook from b6 to b4. Check.
Not good.
King from f4 to e3. Rook from b4 to b3. Rook
Yep.
takes bishop. Check. King from e3 to e2. Pawn from a5 to a4. Rook from e5 to c5. Rook takes pawn. Rook from b3 to b1. Rook from c5 to a5. Rook from b1 to h1. Rook from a5 to a4. Rook takes pawn. Rook from h1 to h5. Rook from a4 to g4. King from g6 to f5. Rook from g4 to g7. King from f5 to f6. Rook from h8 to h7. Rook from h5 to h6. Rook takes pawn. Rook from g7 to f7. Rook takes pawn. King from f6 to g5. Rook from f7 to g7. King from g5 to f6. King from e2 to e3. Rook from h6 to h7. Rook takes rook. Rook from g7 to h7. Rook takes rook. King from f6 to g6. Rook from h7 to a7. King from g6 to f5. King from e3 to d4. King from f5 to g6. King from d4 to e5. King from g6 to h6. King from e5 to e6. 6 to g6.
Okay.
Rook from a7 to a8. King from g6 to g5. Rook from a8 to f8. King from g5 to h5. Pawn from f2 to f3. King from h5 to g6. Pawn from f3 to f4. King from g6 to h6. Pawn from f4 to f5. King from h6 to g7. King from e6 to e7. King from g7 to h6. Pawn from f5 to f6. King from h6 to h7. Pawn from f6 to f7. King from h7 to g6. Rook from f8 to e8. King from g6 to f5. Pawn from f7 to f8. King from f5 to e4. King from e7 to f7. King from e4 to d5. King from f7 to g7. King from d5 to d4. Queen from f8 to f7.
Gotcha.
King from d4 to d3. Queen from f7 to d7. King from d3 to c3. Rook from e8 to c8. King from c3 to b3. Queen from d7 to b7. King from b3 to a3. Rook from c8 to a8.
That's checkmate.